You can prepare all the documents, prove solid financial stability, receive a prestigious scholarship, or simply want to visit family in the U.S., and still be denied a visa, with no explanation, no second chance. In 2025, millions of people across Asia are facing a cold reality. The door to America isn't closing because they did something wrong, but because they come from an unlucky country, Bangladesh, when an opportunity is branded as a threat. There is a strange paradox existing in an increasingly flat world. Globalization is praised, educational cooperation encouraged, economic exchange expanded. Yet, the very gateways symbolizing those ideals, like visas to the United States, are quietly closing for millions of people simply because they hold an unlucky nationality. Bangladesh is a prime example, not because its people did something wrong, but because of a deeply rooted bias in the U.S. visa system, presumed immigrant intent. With over 170 million people, Bangladesh is one of the fastest-growing middle-class societies in Asia. Cities like Dhaka are not only densely populated, but also vibrant, full of tech startups, financial hubs, and students striving for international scholarships. But in stark contrast to this internal development, the path to the U.S., whether for study, business, or tourism, is becoming increasingly fragile, like a crack spreading through a system built on suspicion. Every year, tens of thousands of Bangladeshis prepare their U.S. visa applications with the mindset of doing everything right. Students holding acceptance letters from prestigious universities, engineers invited to technology conferences, or parents with children in California simply wishing to visit their grandchildren. They enter interviews with certified documents, stable finances, clear property ownership, and transparent travel history. Yet after only a few minutes in a consular room, that dream is dismissed with a brief sentence: not qualified. No explanation, no appeal. No one really knows the specific reason, but most understand. The invisible weight of immigrant intent, the assumption that every applicant plans to stay, hangs over them. Though this presumption has long been embedded in U.S. law, its application lacks consistent standards. A young single applicant may be viewed with suspicion simply for not being married. Someone with children in the U.S. is assumed likely to stay to help raise grandchildren. Even an engineer with a strong travel history in Europe may not escape the doubtful gaze because it's not enough reason to return home. What's important to note is, this isn't an official policy or a political ban. It is the byproduct of an opaque operational mechanism, where visa approval depends too much on the personal impressions of the interviewer rather than a fair data-driven process. And that's what turns carefully prepared applications, meant to represent trust and collaboration, into lottery tickets of chance. In a broader sense, this isn't just Bangladesh's story. It reflects how the U.S. is operating its visa system amidst global competition, immigration concerns, and unconscious biases. When a country with a young population, strong academic capacity, and growing strategic ties like Bangladesh is still being systematically excluded from the American dream, the question arises: what is America really protecting? Security or stereotype? The consequence of rejection is more than just a broken dream. It's the erosion of faith in a system once seen as a global standard. For every student denied, a classroom in New York loses an Asian perspective. For every entrepreneur blocked from attending a trade fair, a chance for cooperation is shut down. And for every family that can't reunite, a human story is brushed aside by the cold signature on a rejection slip. In 2025, as the world becomes increasingly divided by bias, data, and algorithm, a visa is no longer just an entry permit. It is a mirror reflecting how a nation views the world. And if America hopes to maintain its global leadership, perhaps it's time to reconsider how it's treating citizens from Dhaka, not as intruders, but as people knocking with belief. Cambodia, when silent politics make ordinary people pay the price. There is no alarm, no official sanction announcement, just a series of U.S. visas quietly denied, steadily, silently, as if someone within the system had pulled down an iron curtain without saying a word. For the Cambodian people, the dream of coming to America in 2025 did not shatter in a public crisis. It faded quietly between unexplained interviews and cold, curt emails. Visa denied. Not everyone knows that the relationship between the United States and Cambodia has been strained for years, partially due to deportation policies. When Cambodia refused to accept Khmer origin citizens deported from the U.S. for criminal offenses, Washington responded with visa sanctions, officially targeted at high-ranking officials. But in reality, the impact reached far wider. Thousands of innocent citizens, unrelated to politics or crime, were swept into this cold storm. On student forums, in Cambodian community groups in Phnom Penh or Siem Reap, such stories appear more frequently. My child was accepted into a university in Ohio, but got denied a visa. I had an invitation to my sister's wedding in Houston with complete sponsorship documents, but still got rejected with no clear reason. These stories repeat so often that they've become a bitter truth. Cambodians, even with full documentation, clear finances, and formal invitations, are shut out of America's gates not for what they've done, but for what their government once refused. What makes the situation more bitter is the randomness of the system. Two students from the same school, studying the same major, with the same scholarship and travel history. One gets approved, the other denied. Two mothers, both visiting their children living legally in the U.S. One allowed to fly, the other stopped. No one truly knows what the real criteria are, and no one has the right to know. Explanations don't exist. Appeals are unthinkable. For many Cambodians, this is not just a failed visa application. It is a silent denial of their identity. The feeling of being equated with political risk, judged not by individual merit, but by the passport they carry, has become a shared pain within the community. A punishment with no name, no declaration, but one that spreads like an oil spill. However, beyond the rejections lies a deeper concern: the erosion of faith. People are beginning to lose trust in international systems. They no longer see the U.S. visa as a measure of transparency or fairness, but as a politicized game where humans are merely background figures. Instead of trying harder, they gradually withdraw, seeking destinations like Australia, Canada, or Europe, where at least refusals come with reasons and a chance to respond. On a macro level, this raises a serious question. If the United States, a country once proud of being the land of opportunity and a fortress of democracy, is treating citizens of a small nation like Cambodia with such cold silence and unverifiable mechanisms, what does that say about America's diplomatic direction in the 21st century? The answer doesn't lie with a State Department spokesperson, but in the tired eyes of the mothers denied visas for the third time, of young students putting scholarship papers back in a drawer, of business people giving up dreams of shaking hands with American partners because they didn't meet the conditions. These people are not threats. They are seekers of opportunity, of connection, people who want to believe that the world still holds an open door for them. But, at this moment, that door, at least for Cambodians, hasn't slammed shut. It's just inching closed, little by little, silently, in shades of gray, and full of helplessness. Vietnam. When trust is bound by old memories. If you look at recent diplomatic photos between the United States and Vietnam, you'll see smiles, handshakes, optimistic declarations of a comprehensive strategic partnership. Two nations that were once enemies have now become allies in multiple fields: economy, education, defense. But beneath that glossy surface lies a choking reality. Thousands of Vietnamese citizens, despite having full qualifications and good intentions, are still coldly denied U.S. visas because of a past they did not create and a system that won't let them step beyond it. For many years, Vietnam has been listed among the countries with high visa overstay rates, meaning people who were granted U.S. visas but didn't leave on time. That statistic, although not representative of all Vietnamese, has become a heavy shadow hanging over every visa application. An invisible ghost, where simply holding Vietnamese nationality marks you within the system as high risk, even if you're a university lecturer invited to present at a science conference in Boston, or a student newly accepted to Stanford on a full scholarship. Ironically, the more Vietnamese citizens travel legally to the U.S. for study, business, or family visits, the more outdated the overstay history becomes. Yet the visa review system does not forget, or does not want to forget. Stereotypical assessments still apply, sometimes simply because the applicant is young, unmarried, or lacks travel history to developed countries. We cannot grant a visa at this time, but that does not mean you are unqualified. The pre-printed response on rejection slips handed out daily at U.S. consulates in Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi. But for the recipient, it is a denial, a wave of disappointment crashing into their trust. No one explains why valid documents, clear finances, and strong academic records are judged as insufficient reasons to return to Vietnam. No one says it directly, but everyone understands. They are suspected simply because they carry a red passport. Behind every rejection is a disrupted story. A student from Hue forced to cancel her master's program in environmental studies at the University of Oregon, even with a full scholarship. A software engineer in Da Nang denied the chance to visit a partner company in Silicon Valley, despite previous travel to Europe, Australia, Japan, all with timely returns. A mother from Haiphong blocked from meeting her daughter after giving birth in the U.S. simply because a consular officer judged there were not enough ties to return. The problem is not just the denial, it's the way it happens: inconsistent, opaque, and offering no path for correction. Vietnamese citizens don't just feel rejected from the American dream, they feel rejected from the right to be heard. To be judged as someone likely to overstay without the chance to respond, that's not immigration policy. That's the refusal of dialogue. Meanwhile, the U.S. government continues to push for cooperation programs with Vietnam, from defense and education to semiconductor supply chains. But can such cooperation ever be complete if Vietnamese citizens, the very people who represent people-to-people connections, are hindered by a biased and unresponsive system? In 2025, America remains a dream destination for many Vietnamese, not only for its economy or academics, but because of hope in a transparent, fair system where people are judged by ability, not assumptions. But each unexplained rejection letter chips away at that hope, bit by bit. And if America truly wants to build a long-term relationship with Vietnam, it must begin by listening and fixing a system that remains silent in the face of the most legitimate voices. Iran, when nationality becomes a silent sentence. If there's one country that truly understands what it means to be judged not by action but by identity, it's Iran. In the global visa landscape of 2025, Iranians don't just face difficulty accessing America's doors, they are nearly excluded from the game entirely. There is no U.S. embassy on Iranian soil, no visa center, no clear support process. Every hope, every plan, every connection to the country across the ocean must begin with something irrational: leaving your own country, paying a large sum of money and praying in silence. For an Iranian citizen wanting to apply for a U.S. visa, the journey begins by finding a way to a third country, like Turkey, the UAE, or Armenia, just to step foot into a U.S. consulate. But that's only the beginning. Many spend months preparing documents, requesting time off work, arranging finances, and facing suspicious stares the moment they arrive at foreign airports. They're not trying to get to America, as in escaping or seeking asylum. They just want to study, work, visit family, or simply present scientific research at a conference. And what they receive, far too often, is a cold denial, not because of any mistake, but because of the name on their passport. The U.S. visa rejection rate for Iranian citizens consistently ranks among the highest in the world, over 80%. But that number doesn't fully capture the sense of isolation Iranians feel. Here, rejection isn't just a part of screening. It carries the tone of punishment, as if visa applicants are bearing the consequences of a diplomatic war they never had the chance to take sides in. In the name of national security, the U.S. denies thousands of Iranian students every year, including those accepted to top universities like MIT, Yale, or Stanford. They are young scientists with internationally recognized research, software engineers, doctors, scholars, all grouped under a vague risk simply because of where they were born. Even elderly individuals wanting to attend a grandchild's wedding or visit a dying relative aren't spared from that shadow of denial. Some go so far as to pass the interview round, only to be denied the visa at the last minute due to elements that emerged during security screening. No one knows exactly what those elements are. No one is allowed to ask, and no one has the right to appeal. For Iranians, the U.S. visa system is no longer a door to knock on. It is a nameless, reasonless, impenetrable wall. What's even more painful is that Iranian Americans, legal citizens living in California, Texas, or New York, are also affected. They can't invite their parents to graduations, can't reunite with family. These family ties, the foundation of human connection, have been politicized to a chilling degree. In a world where migration and connection are the backbone of progress, Iranians are left suspended between two realities, wanted by the world for their intellect, yet watched with fixed suspicion by the American visa system. The question arises, if the goal of visa policy is to ensure security, is it fair to equate millions of people with the negative actions of a small group? And if the United States truly wants to build lasting influence in culture, science, and diplomacy, can it continue to turn its back on a generation of Iranians eager to contribute to the world rather than be excluded from it? In 2025, the world has moved far beyond the Cold War era. But for Iranians, the feeling of isolation, not because of who they are, but because of how they've been shaped through a political lens, remains. And in that picture, the U.S. may have succeeded in building security walls, but it is slowly losing the very people who should have been bridges. Pakistan. When a shared history still isn't enough to open the door. Few countries have as deep a connection with the United States as Pakistan. From the early days of the Cold War to the post-9/11 fight against terrorism, the two nations have stood side by side, albeit often with tension, in various military, humanitarian, and economic partnerships. Millions of Pakistani Americans live, study, work, and contribute to the United States. They are doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, professors, cultural and economic bridges between two worlds. Yet, in 2025, ironically, it is the people of this very nation who remain among the most frequently denied U.S. visas. And few truly understand why. According to data from the U.S. Department of State, visa denial rates for Pakistani applicants often range between 40% and 60%, depending on the year. But that cold statistic does not reflect the emotional weight Pakistanis carry when facing visa rejection. Not just once, but repeatedly, even after carefully preparing their documents, meeting all requirements, and having no blemish on their legal or financial history. There are stories so painful they've become symbols of helplessness. A doctor who served on the COVID-19 front lines in Karachi, invited to speak at a health conference in Chicago, denied a visa due to concerns over potential overstay. A brilliant student who received a full scholarship to Columbia University, rejected without a specific reason. An elderly father simply wishing to witness his son's graduation in the U.S., with full sponsorship documents, still refused with the familiar reasoning, insufficient ties to home country. What frustrates Pakistani applicants most is not just the high rejection rate, but the lack of transparency in the review process. There are no clear criteria, no detailed guidance, no mechanism for feedback or appeal. You can be denied despite having traveled to Europe, maintaining a substantial bank account, owning property in Lahore or Islamabad, and holding a formal invitation from a reputable U.S. institution. But if a consular officer senses risk, it renders everything meaningless. In the minds of many Pakistanis, applying for a U.S. visa is no longer a process, but a gamble. A harsh lottery where honesty, effort, and qualifications do not guarantee any positive outcome. This hurts, not just individuals, but entire communities. Academic dreams are buried. Business opportunities are lost. Family reunions are delayed indefinitely. What's more painful is when Pakistani Americans, citizens who pay taxes, run companies, teach at top universities, still cannot bring their loved ones to the U.S., not even once. They feel severed by a system that pays no attention to context or personal stories, only the stamp on a passport. This doesn't just erode family bonds. It plants seeds of doubt in those who once believed America stood for opportunity and justice. From a geopolitical standpoint, maintaining a harsh visa policy toward Pakistan serves no clear strategic purpose. It does not enhance security, does not improve bilateral relations, and certainly doesn't portray the U.S. as a reliable partner in the region. On the contrary, it sends a contradictory message that despite shared history, despite a strong diaspora, Pakistanis are still not viewed with basic fairness. In 2025, as the U.S. continues to face global challenges in talent competition, international trust, and value-driven leadership, its visa policy toward Pakistan reflects a sad paradox. A nation once considered a close ally is now treated as a potential threat, not because of anything its people have done wrong, but because the system gives them no chance to prove otherwise. In a world that needs more connection than ever, is America closing too many doors, including ones that were once bridges, all because of unnamed suspicion? If so, what it may lose isn't just a few visa applications, but trust, goodwill, and relationships built across generations. Afghanistan. When promises become memories that never get answered. Perhaps no country bears more scars from U.S. intervention than Afghanistan. 2 decades of military involvement, billions of dollars in aid, hundreds of thousands of Afghans cooperating with U.S. agencies, organizations, the military, and NGOs, and then, in one swift withdrawal in 2021, it all vanished into thin air. But what followed was the real long-term shock. A visa system that barely exists and promises of protection, once spoken under the glow of conference lights, now never mentioned again. After the Taliban returned to power, the U.S. Embassy in Kabul shut down. That meant Afghan citizens no longer had any official channel to apply for a visa within their own country. To access opportunities for education, family reunification, or even to escape threats of violence, they had to do something that seemed irrational: cross into a third country, like Pakistan, Qatar, or the UAE. just to attend an interview that might never happen. And if you think this only affects a small elite, look at the numbers that were never widely published. Thousands of people who worked as interpreters for the U.S. military, medical aides, infrastructure experts, teachers in U.S.-funded education programs, all have submitted applications for immigration or asylum visas years ago. But by 2025, many of them still have not received a response. Some were rejected for unclear reasons. Others were simply forgotten in an overwhelmed system lacking resources. More painful still is the helplessness of those who overcame every obstacle to reach the gate, and were still turned away. A female student from Herat received a full scholarship from a university in California, but couldn't apply for a visa because there was no place to submit her application in-country. A former doctor who worked for an international health organization and is now being hunted by the Taliban for assisting Americans, he's forced to live in hiding, using a fake passport, while his humanitarian visa request remains under review. On the other side, the U.S. government has repeatedly declared its continued commitment to support Afghan allies. But that support has become a formality, written on press releases, not enacted on the ground. The special visa system for those who served U.S. missions, SIV, Special Immigrant Visa, operates at a pace that is shamefully slow. They are asked to provide verification documents from organizations that have already left, to explain a past they once had to conceal just to survive. For ordinary citizens, women, students, journalists, artists, applying for a U.S. visa is no longer a distant dream, but an impossible journey. Many cannot get a passport due to tight control by the Taliban government. Others cannot cross borders because they lack valid ID documents. And even if they manage to reach Islamabad or Doha, they face interview schedules that stretch on for months, while their lives remain under daily threat from violence the world has grown used to. From a moral standpoint, the question arises, can the United States continue to promote values of democracy, human rights, and freedom globally, while turning its back on the very people who believed in those values and risked everything to support them? From a strategic perspective, what happens to the credibility of a superpower when its promises become something no one believes in anymore, and visas, once symbols of hope, turn into evidence of abandonment? In 2025, Afghanistan's story no longer appears on front pages, but across the border, in cramped hostels in Lahore, in overcrowded refugee offices in Istanbul, and in thousands of inboxes awaiting replies from the U.S. State Department, there are still people waiting, not waiting for a miracle, but waiting for what was once promised. And in that waiting, there is not only disappointment, there is deep hurt born of a sad truth. Sometimes the hardest thing to obtain isn't a visa, it's justice. North Korea, when there's no door to be denied. If in Bangladesh, Cambodia, or Afghanistan, applying for a U.S. visa is an unequal battle, then in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the very concept of applying for a visa has never even had a chance to form. Here, the pain doesn't lie in being denied, but in never having the right to ask. No application, no interview schedule, no process, no hope. On the global visa map of 2025, North Korea is a blank spot, not because no one wants to leave, but because the world has assumed they simply cannot. There is no U.S. embassy in Pyongyang, no visa processing center, no official consular relationship between the two countries. And in a country where leaving the border is considered treason, where citizens must request permission just to move between provinces, the dream of a trip to the United States, even just to visit family or attend an academic conference, sounds like fiction. To North Koreans, the outside world is another planet, and the United States, a symbol distorted through the lens of propaganda, is both terrifying and unreachable. And yet, The reality is even more ironic. Among the rare few North Koreans who have left the country, mostly diplomats, athletes, or those from privileged classes, a small number have defected, sought asylum, and started new lives in South Korea, Europe, or Canada. These individuals, after reintegrating into society, learning new languages, and finding stable jobs, sometimes try to apply for U.S. visas to visit relatives or participate in humanitarian efforts. But even they, those who have left the regime, have clear identities, hold new citizenship, are still frequently denied simply because of one thing: their place of birth. Pyongyang, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That single line of birth is enough to trigger additional security checks, uncontrollable review processes, and, in many cases, a denial without specific explanation. To Americans, this might be seen as risk prevention. But to those who risk their lives to cross borders, lived in Thai refugee camps for years, and started over from nothing, it's a stab at the trust they once placed in the free world. For the Korean-American community, the inability to invite surviving relatives from North Korea to the U.S. is a pain that has lasted for decades. Letters that are never sent, reunions that never happen, voices calling mother or father with no reply, all are the legacy of a war that never officially ended, and a foreign policy that never found a humanitarian path. In 2025, while South Korea and the U.S. continue to maintain tight military, economic, and cultural alliances, the humanitarian fractures caused by the North Korea-U.S. divide continue to bleed quietly. No one denies that North Korea is a special case, a closed-off nation, strictly censored, accused of serious human rights violations, clearly not to be treated like any other normal country. But it's precisely because of this uniqueness that cutting off all access becomes counterproductive. When you allow no one from that country to engage with the outside world, not even researchers, journalists, students, or refugees, you are unintentionally maintaining the very circle of isolation you once claimed to want to break. And in a bitter paradox, while the United States continues to declare its support for the North Korean people, opposition to dictatorship, and readiness for peaceful negotiation, its own visa system leaves no pathway, not even symbolically, for North Korean citizens to see another world. No bridges, no trial opportunities, no humanitarian corridor, no capacity to change anything, even when you've already changed yourself. In 2025, in a world where data is weaponized, borders are digitized, and documents can be scanned in seconds, it is deeply ironic that there exists a nation where people are born without the right to be evaluated, because they're not even allowed to enter the review process, not denied, but with no chance to be denied, not excluded, but never even brought into the frame. And perhaps that is the cruelest form of isolation, absence so complete it becomes invisible. And absence is shaking the U.S. economy. But not from war, crisis, or natural disaster. It's the quiet disappearance of Canadian tourists, empty gas stations in Maine, vacant hotel rooms in Vermont, and deserted golf courses in Texas are all telling the same story. The northern neighbor is turning away, and America is paying the price. Number 1. Maine. When the bridges became lonely. For decades, the bridge spanning the St. Croix River connecting the town of Calais, Maine, with St. Stephen, New Brunswick, wasn't just infrastructure. It was an economic heartbeat, a living symbol of the peaceful and familiar relationship between the U.S. and Canada. Every weekend, long lines of cars with Quebec and New Brunswick license plates crossed the border to fill up gas tanks, shop duty-free, grab lunch at roadside diners, or simply stroll through local stores. But in 2025, that bridge is no longer bustling. The cars now cross slowly, and can be counted on one hand. And on the other side, Maine's border towns are gradually shrinking, growing colder, much like the winters they once shared with northern visitors. This isn't just Calais' story. From Houlton to Fort Kent, from Jackman to Van Buren, the entire Maine border region is witnessing a quiet yet consequential retreat. Shops that once thrived on Canadian customers now hang signs reading, "Closed early." A pizza shop in Madawaska, once famous for cross-border Friday night orders, just announced its closure after 24 years. The owner wrote on Facebook, "We used to be the place where Americans and Canadians met after work. But now it's just us, and a kitchen that no longer sizzles." This change didn't come suddenly. It began with casual conversations between customers and cashiers. Questions about exchange rates, stricter passport checks, the feeling of no longer being welcomed. After the pandemic, cracks that once seemed minor started spreading. Stricter border policies, increasingly discriminatory remarks from American politicians, and the repeated subtle implication that Canada is the little sibling made many feel dismissed. Over time, that feeling turned into action. Canadians began choosing to stay home, spend locally, and explore their own towns instead of heading south like they used to. For America's big cities, this might be just a small ripple. But for Maine, where hundreds of businesses rely on cross-border traffic, it's a reverse tide. Many towns in the state's northeast don't have big factories, international airports, or specialized industries. They survive on connection, the kind Canadians used to sustain with consistency, from daily shopping to weekend getaways. A gift shop owner in Presque Isle shared through tears, "I don't need a flood of tourists. I just want to see familiar faces again." The Quebec man who always bought chocolates for his wife. The New Brunswick couple who asked me about the weather in Portland. Now they're gone, and so are we. Slowly disappearing. Local governments are starting to realize the gravity of the issue. Some towns have tried relaunching cross-border fairs, promoting tourism via social media, or cutting taxes to retain businesses. But when the problem lies in trust and perception, administrative solutions feel weak. Once trust is cracked, it can't be mended with welcome signs or discount coupons. Maine's story poses a bigger question for America. How are we treating our closest friends? While national debates revolve around China, Russia, or immigration from the South, it's the once warm relationship with our northern neighbor that is quietly cooling. Not because of conflict, but because of neglect. And the consequences don't appear in televised speeches, but in empty storefronts and silent "for lease" signs fluttering in the cold Maine wind. The border bridge is still there, strong, steel, connecting both shores as it has for hundreds of years. But what once kept it alive was the daily crossing, the quiet mutual respect between two nations. As those footsteps grow fewer, the bridge doesn't collapse, but the towns fall silent. And the scariest part isn't the noise that's gone. It's the silence that's becoming permanent. Number 2. Vermont. When autumns no longer speak French. If Maine is the steady breath of the border, then Vermont was once the heart of seasonal memory, where maple leaves turned a fiery red, where snow-covered peaks became an essential destination for tens of thousands of families from Quebec each year. From towns like Stowe, Jay, and Montpelier to the valleys of the Northeast Kingdom, Canadians didn't just come to visit. They came like relatives keeping an annual promise. Every year, right in time for the fall foliage or when the ski slopes began to open. But in 2025, something changed. Autumn still blazes gold. Winter still blankets everything white. But Vermont feels empty. And for locals who depend on that familiar rhythm, this silence feels like an endless winter. At Jay Peak, a resort nestled right near the border, once proud that French was spoken almost as much as English, the ski rental lines are gone. A young receptionist admitted, "We used to prepare bilingual signs because Quebec guests outnumbered even those from Boston. Now, the signs are still here, but they're not." Vacation condos once booked solid from September now sit vacant until January. Hotel owners are scrambling to run French-language ads on social media, hoping to lure back those once loyal travelers. But what they're losing isn't just a customer base, it's a cultural habit. Vermont doesn't have megacities like New York, nor long coastlines like California. What this state has, and once preserved so well, is a sense of peace, familiarity, and, above all, hospitality. Here, Canadians were called by name, not nationality. Small cafes installed espresso machines simply because Montreal tourists liked Italian-style cappuccinos. Clothing stores stocked extra sizes from Quebec brands. A shop in Stowe even accepted Canadian dollars at a custom rate, just to retain long-time customers. But then, it wasn't just the economy, nor entirely the exchange rate. What changed, according to many, was the atmosphere. Stories of more intensive passport checks, cold stares at border crossings, and political debates on American media made many families feel like Vermont wasn't theirs anymore. Something invisible crept between hospitality and habit, the feeling of being questioned. This shift left very real scars. In Burke, a small town known for adventure tourism, sports equipment shops are liquidating old inventory. A children's ski school had to cancel 3 winter sessions due to low enrollment. A guest house owner who used to hire 6 seasonal workers now keeps only 2. "Not because I want to," she said, "but because I can't afford to pay them when the rooms are empty." In this context, Vermont's government has begun to scramble. Tourism campaigns aimed at Europe and Asia were launched. But with limited budgets and cultural gaps, the efforts feel sluggish. Vermont needs visitors. But more importantly, it needs the return of those who once saw this state as a second home. At a deeper level, what's happening in Vermont is a reminder of something the global tourism economy sometimes forgets. Not every traveler is a passerby. Some come and stay through trust, memory, and tradition. When they disappear, what's lost isn't just revenue. It's the bond built through time. Vermont may still be beautiful, still peaceful, but when its empty streets no longer echo with the laughter of Canadian children, when French is no longer heard in the bars along snowy slopes, that beauty turns cold. Because tourism is not just about travel, it's about the feeling of being welcomed. And once that feeling is gone, the border doesn't have to close. People simply stop coming back. Number 3. Texas, when the warm sun no longer draws shadows. In mid-January, in the bitter cold of Alberta or Saskatchewan, caravans of RVs with Canadian license plates used to roll southward, covering thousands of kilometers to reach the land where the sun still shone warmly and the sky remained untouched by frost. Southern Texas. Towns like McAllen, Harlingen, Mission, or Brownsville, seemingly hidden on the vast map of the United States, suddenly came alive, bustling with the arrival of tens of thousands of northern snowbirds. But in the winter of 2025, something strange was noticed. RV parks sat empty, roadside diners had vacant tables, and the beach along Corpus Christi Bay was so quiet you could hear every gust of wind. Texas was never a traditional tourist destination for Canadians until winters became harsher. Housing prices in Florida soared, and older adults began seeking a place both sunny and affordable. From then on, Texas became the ideal destination: low cost, mild climate, friendly communities, and most importantly, a sense of freedom that nowhere else offered. Many didn't just visit once. They returned year after year, grew familiar with the diner owners, knew local doctors by name, even joined charity groups or community golf clubs. Some even bought land, built permanent mobile homes, and called Texas their second home. Yet, what once symbolized freedom is now making many feel out of place. Not because the weather changed, the Texas sun still shines bright, but the looks are different. The words are different. The atmosphere is different. Many Canadian tourists have begun whispering about the feeling of being watched, not because of nationality, but because of views. A man from British Columbia recounted how, during a small party at an RV park, when he mentioned Canada's public health care policy, a local laughed loudly and said, "And you're still alive?" The whole gathering went quiet. Another couple shared that they once felt like family, but now tread carefully when discussing climate change, gun control, or immigration policies. Texas has always had a strong voice and clear political character. That's nothing new, but the harshness in discussions, the polarization in media, and the way some political leaders use phrases like the weaklings from the North or Canada, the flawed version of America, have made many feel unwelcome. This feeling didn't come from a single event, but from an accumulation. From being questioned more strictly at the border, to curious stares in the pharmacy, or even a discriminatory banner hung outside a small church they once visited. And that led to an inevitable outcome. People stopped coming back. According to local tourism associations, bookings at RV parks dropped 30 to 40% compared to last year. Restaurants in the Rio Grande Valley reported that their regular Canadian patrons had nearly vanished. Many pharmacies, gas stations, and repair shops, once thriving during Canadian season, are now forced to close early or lay off staff. A golf course owner in Mission stated bluntly, "We used to be the regular meetup spot for hundreds of Canadians. Every morning echoed with laughter. Now there's only wind and fast-growing weeds." No one denies that Texas can survive without Canadians. But the issue is, it no longer lives the way the local communities once loved. A winter without tourists doesn't just affect the economy, it makes small towns feel lonelier, as if part of their soul is missing. The familiar sounds of bonjour, or English laced with a French accent used to be background music, like waves lapping against the shore. When they disappear, the seemingly small voids turn out to be hauntingly silent. Some still come, some still patiently stay, but even they are starting to ask, will we return next year? Not because of the weather, not because of the cost, but because of the feeling of being pushed away from a place that once embraced them. And when that feeling spreads, no matter how warm the Texas sun is, it can no longer melt the invisible distance that has just formed. Number 4. South Carolina, when the waves no longer carry. Promises back. Some places don't need loud advertising to become appealing. Myrtle Beach, the iconic shoreline of South Carolina, is one such place. It was once described as the spring living room for Canadians, especially from Ontario and Quebec. People tired of snow, craving sunshine, and seeking a warm escape from busy lives. For them, Myrtle Beach wasn't just a travel destination, but a habit, a natural promise with each returning spring. But that promise, in 2025, was swept away by the sea breeze. If you visit Grand Strand on a March morning, everything still looks the same. The long beach, the salty wind, rows of inns lined up neatly. But what's missing is the rhythm once stirred by the laughter of Canadian tourists, by license plates reading "Yours to Discover" or "Je me souviens" stretched along Highway 17. The absence isn't loud, but it's unmistakably clear. Empty coffee tables at diners once packed during peak season. Early morning golf courses no longer filled with groups lining up to warm up. And especially, hotel managers now sigh when looking at booking rates, once a reliable constant. The issue isn't just the loss of international visitors. Myrtle Beach is losing loyal guests, people who didn't need advertisements, didn't need discount coupons, yet booked rooms regularly each year, often in the same condo, on the same floor, during the same week. They were the quiet but steady foundation of an entire local supply chain, from housekeeping staff, chefs, taxi drivers, to fruit sellers at the morning market. When they disappeared, it wasn't a shock, but a slow crack, layer by layer, corner by corner, across this modest economy. No one knows exactly what made Canadians hesitate. Partly it's the less favorable exchange rate, partly it's the more cumbersome border process after the pandemic, but mostly it's something harder to name: the feeling of no longer being treated the same. Jokes on American television about Canada just being the 51st state or increasingly harsh immigration policies have made many northern travelers feel out of sync. A 64-year-old woman from Ottawa, who once called Myrtle Beach her soul's retreat, shared that she now feels not like a cherished friend, but just a stranger with a wallet. Some hotel owners have tried to turn things around. They've launched spring promotional packages, advertised in French, sent thank you emails to longtime Canadian clients. But the big question still lingers. How do you hold on to someone when what they lost isn't the price, but the feeling of being respected? In Myrtle Beach, there's something locals once took great pride in: stability. Unlike trendy destinations where guests come and go with social media waves, this place thrived on return visits. Canadian tourists were once an irreplaceable part of the survival equation for family-owned restaurants, small bakeries, and community golf courses. But when those who booked back in October fall silent, small businesses are forced to recalculate. A bakery owner in Surfside said with regret, "Every March, I used to bake an extra 200 butter tarts, a favorite of our Ontario customers. This year, I had to throw out nearly half the batch because no one came to pick them up." For her, it wasn't just lost revenue. It was the loss of a relationship she had cherished for 18 years. South Carolina may still bask in the sun, may still hear the ocean waves, but without Canadians, spring feels like it's missing a color. Not the color of clothing, skin, or nationality, but the shade of quiet trust. A land once seen as a second home is now becoming a distant destination. And in tourism, sometimes the scariest thing isn't losing customers. It's losing the feeling of familiarity. Once that leaves, it's very hard to call it back. Number 5. New Jersey. When shopping carts are left half-filled. New Jersey has never been the final destination for Canadians. But for the past 2 decades, this state has held a unique role, an ideal stopover. Situated between vibrant New York and historic Philadelphia, New Jersey has acted like a familiar corridor on the travel map for northern neighbors. They came to hunt for brand-name deals at Jersey Gardens, to try their luck in Atlantic City, to breathe in the ocean air at Cape May, then left, bringing home bags full of goods, long receipts, and sometimes stories retold over dinner in Toronto or Montreal. Yet, in 2025, something strange is happening. Parking lots in front of outlet malls that were once packed now offer easy spots right by the entrance. The checkout counters at the mills, once crowded on weekends, now move sluggishly, with staff standing more than working. Meanwhile, the casinos in Atlantic City, once lively with groups of middle-aged Canadian visitors, now sit quiet, with none of the familiar laughter blending English and French accents. The reason behind this shift isn't simply cost or politics, but a subtle change in perceived value received. With a less favorable exchange rate, rising toll road fees, and increasingly thorough border procedures, many Canadians are beginning to ask, "Am I really as welcome as I used to be?" A traveler from Manitoba put it bluntly, "I don't mind spending money. I mind the feeling of being treated like a stranger in a place that used to see me as a regular." That feeling doesn't come from clear-cut moments like being refused service or blatant discrimination. It stems from a series of small details, like the scrutinizing glance when showing a passport, like the offhand comment from a store clerk. Not many Canadians these days, huh? Tough economy up there. It's the feeling of being talked about, not talked to. And for a community of travelers once considered valued guests, that feeling becomes the greatest barrier. New Jersey once knew how to serve this special group well. Many malls had French-language signage. Some stores even accepted Canadian dollars during spring promotions. Atlantic City hosted music nights specifically for Quebec visitors, even offering blackjack tables with bilingual dealers. But in recent years, as the stream of Canadian travelers slowed, those special programs quietly disappeared, creating a cycle. Fewer visitors, fewer perks, less reason to return, even fewer visitors. Local shop owners are beginning to feel the pressure. A manager at an outlet in Elizabeth shared, "Before, every Victoria Day weekend in Canada, we'd have to schedule overtime, call in extra help. This year, we canceled all extra shifts because no one came." A hotel staffer in Atlantic City said, "Canadians aren't loud, they're polite, spend steadily, and most importantly, they come back regularly. Losing them, it's not just losing revenue, it's losing stability." And perhaps that's the key word, stability. In the service industry, nothing is more valuable than guests who know what they want, when they come, and who return year after year. Canada used to be New Jersey's most stable source, not flashy, but steady and reliable. Now, as that trust erodes, even signs screaming "sale, extra 40% off" aren't enough to draw people back. New Jersey won't collapse because it lost Canadian visitors. But what's happening is the quiet fading of a relationship. And if it isn't rekindled with respect and welcome, one day, those brightly lit outlet centers and buzzing casinos may become nothing more than shells, echoing without laughter. At that point, the abandoned shopping carts won't just symbolize consumer behavior, but serve as evidence of a connection broken without anyone realizing exactly when. Number 6. Georgia. When encounters become one-sided memories. Atlanta, the largest city in Georgia, was once a crossroads of music, history, and modern energy. For Canadians, it wasn't an obvious choice like New York or Miami, but rather a hidden gem gradually discovered. They came to visit the Civil Rights Museum, to watch an NBA game with the Hawks, to enjoy signature Southern BBQ, and to attend music festivals they couldn't find back home. Georgia, in the eyes of many northern travelers, was just far enough to feel new, just close enough to return easily. But in 2025, tourism offices and hotels in Atlanta began noticing something strange. Spring, the peak season for international visitors, was fading. No longer were there large groups of Canadian tourists taking photos in Centennial Olympic Park. No longer the lines of travelers with rolling luggage queuing up for the Georgia Aquarium. Flights from Toronto or Vancouver to Hartsfield-Jackson were no longer full like in previous years. Instead, there were empty seats and a sense of absence not immediately visible in numbers, but quietly spreading. This absence didn't come as a deliberate collective retreat. It happened like a silent breakup, when the other side no longer mentions you in their travel plans. Many Canadians, especially young people and middle-class families, say that Georgia is no longer on the priority list. They're not rejecting it, nor condemning it. They just shifted. They go to Europe, to the West Coast, or simply stay home because why go far when the destination no longer feels safe or welcoming? It may sound vague, but feeling is what drives travel behavior. In recent years, Georgia has appeared more frequently in international headlines, but not for its attractions, rather for political tensions. Controversial bills related to voting rights, personal freedoms, and public protests have made the state's image more polarizing. Many Canadians, accustomed to a more conciliatory social climate, feel Georgia is becoming unpredictable and too different in values. A couple from Calgary, who once honeymooned in Savannah, returned to Atlanta for their 10th anniversary. But this year, they canceled the trip at the last minute. The reason wasn't weather, cost, or service. They simply didn't want to sit in a city where we feel like we have to pick sides in a debate that doesn't belong to us. They didn't want their vacation to become a stage for cultural conflict. Hotels and restaurants in Georgia understand that what they're losing isn't big spenders, but consistent ones. Canadian visitors don't always spend lavishly, but they book early, stay longer, and value professionalism and friendliness. When they disappear, businesses don't just lose revenue, but the steady rhythm they'd grown used to. A hotel manager in Midtown Atlanta shared, "We can survive without Canadians, but when they stop coming, everything becomes harder to predict. We lose the weeks we once knew would be fully booked." Georgia still has everything to be an attractive destination: diverse culture, unique cuisine, beautiful landscapes, and well-developed tourism infrastructure. But the issue isn't resources, it's atmosphere. Atmosphere can't be measured in data, doesn't show up in ads or PR campaigns. It's in the first glance between receptionist and guest, in the smile or indifference of a server, in the sense that you're welcomed not because of your passport, but because you're a person, without prejudice. A concierge at a boutique hotel in Atlanta confessed, "Canadian tourists aren't loud, aren't demanding, but they remember for a long time if they've ever been slighted." That's a truth Georgia's tourism industry needs to recognize. Because silent departures like these are often the hardest to fix. When people aren't angry, don't say anything, they simply choose another path. And then, one day, you wake up in a bustling city and realize those once warm encounters have become one-sided memories, fading quietly, like morning mist over the red-tiled roofs of the South. Number 7. Minnesota. When familiar guests stop knocking. For Canadians living in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, Minnesota wasn't really America in the way they said it with a hint of fondness. It was closer, more familiar, less dramatic. With no blue oceans or glamorous cities, Minnesota attracted with its simplicity. A few weekend days to ski in Duluth, shop in Grand Forks, explore peaceful lakes, and enjoy a warm dinner in a family-owned restaurant in Bemidji. Here, Canadians weren't tourists, they were neighbors. But in 2025, those familiar knocks stopped echoing. Parking lots in front of shopping centers grew sparse. Supermarkets that once had bilingual price signs and shelves stocked with familiar northern brands now began shrinking inventory. On the bulletin boards at ski schools in the Iron Range, classes for the group from Winnipeg were no longer registering like every other year. The border region, once seemingly eternal in its two-way flow, is now experiencing a winter longer than expected. Not because of snow, but because of absence. Canadians never came to Minnesota to escape anything. They came for the feeling of being welcomed. For years, cross-border trips were part of everyday life. Head into the U.S. on the weekend, shop at Target, fill the gas tank, then return home with a few small gifts for the kids. It was modest, unflashy consumption, but incredibly steady. A clothing store in Thief River Falls once compared Canadian visitors to small but consistent waves, not sweeping away anything, but sustaining the shore. So what changed? There wasn't one clear reason. Just small pieces gradually forming a different picture. Gas prices rose. The U.S. dollar made every item about 20% more expensive. Border procedures grew longer, with questions that made visitors feel like they were reporting in, not dropping by. And most of all, the feeling wasn't the same anymore. A family from Brandon used to celebrate their son's birthday each year at a water park in Bloomington. But this year, they stayed in Canada. The mother said, I can't explain it. Everything's fine, but it's no longer fun. It's no one's fault. I just don't want to try so hard to feel comfortable anymore. It's a very real and very dangerous feeling for any tourism industry. When guests don't complain, don't get angry, they just quietly stop coming. Businesses in Minnesota are starting to feel the absence not through financial reports, but through missing shifts. A cafe in Warroad that once added weekend hours each spring now sticks to regular hours. A grocery store near the border reduced orders of frozen pastries from a brand popular in Manitoba. A front desk staffer at a small hotel in Ely shared, "I miss the way they'd ask for directions in that soft Canadian accent. I miss how they always tipped well and said thank you twice." Minnesota isn't a state that lives off international tourism, but in small communities where one repair shop, one diner, and one gas station form the local economy's backbone. A few hundred regulars each month are enough to keep life steady. The absence doesn't cause disaster. It creates a kind of silent erosion where people don't quite realize what they've lost until they look back. And perhaps that's Minnesota's quiet lesson. Sometimes the strongest relationships don't need praise or signed agreements. They exist through habit, respect, and a sense of trust. When one of those three fades, no breakup needs to be announced. People simply won't return. Today, Minnesota's border towns still wait. The checkpoints are open, the roads are clear, and the benches in front of cafes still sit empty. But unless there's a change in how Canadians feel when they enter the U.S., those seats may remain vacant. Not because the road is blocked, but because there's no longer a reason to come back.